Today, I'm with Dr. Jeff Walkley, National Disability and Diversity Manager for Belgravia Leisure, in which he's been in the role for about 6 years. Belgravia Leisure connect community to leisure and manage over 170 facilities across Australia and New Zealand and are part of the Belgravia Group. Jeff is also the CEO of the Belgravia Foundation, a charity supporting the leisure sector, initiated by Belgravia Leisure to promote improved practices, leading, supporting inclusion for all in leisure. Prior to Belgravia, Jeff worked in academia in the roles of Associate Professor, the Head of Department for Disability Studies, and he was also the Associate Professor, Head of the Department for Exercise and Sports Science. And before all that, Jeff trained initially to be a PE teacher and taught in South Australia and completed a master's at Michigan State University, followed by a PhD at the University of Virginia in the US, with his training focused on inclusion and physical activity. Now, I've known Jeff for a number of years because I used to work for Belgravia Leisure, and I know that Jeff is well respected within the education, sport, leisure, and inclusion sectors, and for his lifetime commitment in helping people become involved in physical activity. And he's received so many awards that I can't list them all now, otherwise it'll take the whole time of our chat today. But just a few of those are his recognition for outstanding contribution to the Aquatic and Recreation Victoria in 2019, and a Lifetime Achievement Award for Disability in Sport and Recreation Victoria. So what I'll do is I'll drop all his recognition and awards in the feed when I publish this conversation. But I'm really pleased to welcome Jeff today. How are you going, Jeff?
David, I'm well, surprisingly well, given the challenges that I, my family and our community are facing.
Yeah.
But optimistic, and I'm well, thank you.
Yeah, you've always been someone that shows a lot of positivity, Jeff. And I'm loving this new haircut. I can just see you seem to have grown some locks there.
There's a few people have made some comments about that, David, recently, and harking back to the 1970s, where I was certainly on trend with hair much longer than this. And it must be a family trait, because my son now has hair much longer than this, and often will wear his in a man bun. I had a work colleague the other day who indicated to me that they would be most displeased if I started wearing mine in a hair bun.
Well, while you can, I think, grow it. It looks good. So we'll get straight into it, Jeff. What does well-being mean to you?
For me, it's about health and happiness, and there is a strong interplay between the two. And importantly, with well-being, it's that capacity to have some control and choice about how I achieve my health and my happiness.
Yeah, cool.
So for me, that's what well-being is. Always been interested in the promotion of well-being through physical activity from my early days growing up in country South Australia, where I really was one of those people that was the beneficiary to be raised by the community. I had a set of life circumstances which meant that the community sort of took me on, as they did many others within the community. And even though we lived with modest circumstances, there's nothing that I think that I missed out on as a life experience until I left to head to schooling in Adelaide.
Yeah, excellent.
And that was I think it was a 17 or 18-year-old, so it was really good.
And I've often heard you talk about health and happiness being, really important. And in terms of what you do for your well-being, have you got some examples there?
There's a range of things. So for me, family is the focus. And that certainly is at the core of health and happiness for myself. from a perspective of maintaining and promoting my own health and happiness in addition to the family, I regularly engage in physical activity. I'll do that independently. So I try and walk most days, often accompanied by the dog, on many occasions accompanied by my wife, the love of my life.
Oh,
and
nice.
we will walk with others as well. And we do regularly walk. I also enjoy yard work. I enjoy cutting and splitting wood. And I enjoy all forms of sort of vigorous activity. I play sport, still do, when it's available. I've played basketball twice a week competitively for the last 3 decades since we've been back in Australia. 3.5 decades. So I do that, really enjoy that. Any manner of physical activity that I can find, I really sort of enjoy and embrace. I also am really strong of using a cliche stolen straight from the sporting arena that focus on what you can control. And so I try to consider those things that are within my control and manage those. And I try to give very little consideration to those things that I'm unable to control. I'm aware, but I try not to let those things frustrate or irritate or upset me.
Yeah, I love that. It's like circle of influence. What can you control? You can control the controllables, and what's out of there, it's sometimes you can't choose or change what other things are happening outside of your realm. And this lifelong passion that you've got for supporting disability and diversity, you've talked about, you grew up and you didn't want for anything, but, where does that come from, this passion of yours?
Look, I do have an anecdote that I'll share with you, and it comes back to those days where circumstances were that the community embraced myself and others, and so my education, my engagement in sport, my access to resources, my involvement in activities knew no bounds. We lived in a coastal town called Moonta in South Australia, which for me was an ideal place to be brought up. I did notice that within the small school that we had there, small in relation to city schools, a number of kids that lived with different circumstances, kids who lived with a disability. Some lived in poverty, some live with families that were dysfunctional. And I noticed that often, particularly for the kids with a disability, they weren't involved in those things that I cherished after school, on the weekends, during the school holidays. They weren't in the sporting teams. They weren't down the beach, jumping off the jetty. They weren't riding their bike through the skimp dumps. They weren't doing those things that myself and my mates were doing so often. And it wasn't until I was in late primary school that I inquired of my brother why a particular young person from our community and attending our school, who was a really nice kid, and I inquired about why Ray wasn't involved in things. And my brother, like brothers are wont to do when providing some direction and advice to younger brothers, looked at me with that way and said, because he's alone. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, what's his nickname? And I said, it's Lone. And he said, that's because he's always alone. And it struck me, and I thought, nah, that's not right, just not right. Fortunately, we used to get on our bikes, and a mate of mine was a mate of Raymond's brother. And we headed out to his farm one day, which also was on the coast. and they said, "Do you want to go sailing?" And so we thought, of course we do. So they had a small sailcraft, jumped in it, off we went. Who was the helmsman? It was Ray. And off we went and spent hours out there, had an enormous amount of fun. And Ray was at the helm. We helped with the sheeting of the sails and things like this, but Ray was in control. And it was an interesting sort of reflection for me that I thought, well, given the circumstance, given the opportunity, Ray led the group and did it. So I didn't like that kids were missing out, because I thoroughly enjoyed and benefited for the experiences that others were providing to me. So I thought that that was something that I might do too. And hence, I think that's probably the kernel of what started as a lifelong passion and pursuit.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and just shows you what's possible when you remove those barriers and give people an opportunity, doesn't it? And it's really interesting how that set you on a path to do everything that you've done, and obviously you've worked a lot in academia, but in recent years, obviously you've been working with Belgravia Leisure, who I know do some fantastic work, connecting the community to leisure, and also helping with the Belgravia Foundation. But in terms of Belgravia Leisure and the foundation, can you just tell me a bit more about how they fit into the health and wellness system?
So when I was approaching the conclusion of my time in academia, I had in the back of my mind a bit of an itch, a bit of an irritation. Over 3 decades, I'd worked with, at local, state, national, international level on the promotion of inclusion into physical activity in any form. I'd been aware within Victoria of many organisations and individuals that had great ideas that initiated them based on seed funding that could have come from a philanthropic group or a charitable organisation, and sometimes from government. And I do remember attending an Aquatic Recreation Victoria award ceremony where a program that I had been involved in was a finalist with 7 others. And I spoke to people from each of the other 7 groups, and I was shocked, actually horrified, that every one of those groups had folded. So the Aquatic Recreation has its awards in the year following the achievements. And I was aghast at this, David, and I inquired and I kept on talking to people. And the core to the reason for the failures or the lack of sustainability was that they didn't plan for financial viability, independence, and sustainability. And so I wondered about that. And having worked with Belgravia Leisure when they came onto campus to operate the sports facilities for the university, and I linked with them and we built some programs which I linked into the academic programs to give experiences to undergraduate, postgraduate students, what I call a first positive experience around inclusion and physical activity. Look, Belgravia Leisure was just outstanding. It's the only way to describe it. They were open, they were considerate, and above all, they wanted to be innovative to create solutions to problems which seemed intractable. So we worked together and we built the initial program. And one of the things that I was really impressed about was the link with Belgravia Leisure and the support. That program was a raging success. And from that single program, on one Thursday morning, over a few years, we built it to 14 or 15 programs that ran across 44 weeks of the year. Not surprisingly, as a researcher, we gathered information which confirmed the outcomes were being achieved by the participants, also by their families and those who were paid to care for them, and also by the staff of the leisure centre. So it gave me this cachet of evidence, which I was able to then use when I spoke near the end of my academic career with Belgravia Leisure and invited them to consider what a wonderful thing it would be if they offered me a job. And to his eternal credit, Anthony McIntosh, known by many as Macca, said, "And what would you do, Jeff?" And so I gave him 3 dot points in an elevator pitch, and he looked at me and he says, "We should talk about that." So I took some time off because I needed a break. Then we reconnected, and Anthony championed the opportunity, took responsibility, convinced others within Belgravia Leisure, and then it led to me working with them. My interest was to test myself, but also to change decades where the leisure sector had strived but failed to connect people to leisure, and these people are of any characteristic, need or circumstance. And I wanted to test myself, go on the other side of the fence, so to speak, David. But I had some confidence. And I had some confidence because, in effect, we'd done a field trial over a few years with a Belgravia Leisure managed facility where I'd seen that leadership had embraced the notion of inclusion. And through Macca, I had really strong, committed support, and leadership is a crucial element for organisational change and being able to sustain that. So that's how it all came about. From there, effectively what I've done is translate what I understood was the evidence around inclusion in physical activity environments. The linchpin of it are our staff and the way our staff behave. And my responsibility is to support the organisation so that we can help all of our staff develop a confidence and capacity to welcome, support and include anyone who desires our program services, access to facilities, and even wants to work with us. So that's what my role is.
Yeah, and I loved how you described that as, you worked the 30 odd years in academia, and then you build up all that theory, and then you wanted to, kind of use that practically and test yourself and in terms of its application within the leisure industry. And you talked about Belgravia Leisure there. Can you just provide a little bit of overview of the Belgravia Foundation and how that fits into the system?
So I'm a lifelong observer, and I'm always looking and listening to learn, to try and understand. And one of the things that I noticed with Belgravia Leisure in the early days, that opportunities to compete for or to seek resources from government, philanthropic or charitable sector was stymied because Belgravia Group is a for-profit corporation, ably led by the Lord family. Now, the Belgravia Group, while it's a for-profit organisation, my experience with them has been very, very distinctly that they act as a social enterprise, and they're acting more and more as a social enterprise, where at the core of what they do is to provide the services in an economically viable and sensible way to create the outcomes that the person or group seeking services, programs or experiences wants. And that lined up really nicely with what I wanted. So Belgravia Foundation came about through some conversations a couple of years into my role, where I said, look, we've got we've got something that we need to consider. There's a bit of skepticism around because people wanted to know, well, how is this going to fit, or what was it going to be there? I indicated that Belgravia Group and Belgravia Leisure in particular see themselves as being leaders and innovators, and that's certainly, they're true to their word on that. Mm-hmm. And I said, this is an opportunity for us to provide leadership for the leisure sector and create innovations to address matters to do with social inclusion. So this foundation needs to be able to work on behalf of the entire leisure sector. I recognise that it will need to be resourced by Belgravia Leisure. And one of the things that I want us to accept and cherish is that Belgravia Leisure is in a unique position to be the innovation partner for Belgravia Foundation, where we can apply research evidence-based practices to test, trial, refine and confirm new approaches to old problems in the leisure sector, and then promote them, communicate them, offer them. And that's how the foundation came about. The foundation has three major foci. One is around mental health. Mm-hmm. Another is around staff and creating a culture and capability towards everybody being welcome. And the final is around the area of inclusion into aquatic programs and services, and that's called the All In program. Those three areas are of national and international prominence and need, and they are areas which have been on the minds of the leisure sector for years, but have not been resolved towards a situation where people are being promoted and given opportunities to be included.
Yeah.
So these are big picture items, big ticket items that we're working on.
And I know
locally. Sorry.
I was just about to say that them three areas that you've been talking about, you could just share, because I've seen some great work that Belgravia and the foundation have been doing in mental health and providing support and training around that. So yeah.
And look, in many ways, David, I have you to thank for the support you offered when you were working with the City of Sydney. And I was supporting Belgravia Leisure, who operates the venues on behalf of the City of Sydney. We were asked by the City of Sydney to support people who were living with a mental illness, other people who were experiencing psychological distress. So we created a program called Take Charge. Take Charge is a program based on the evidence around the impact that exercise can have on a person living with mental illness. And so we created that, trialled it in the City of Sydney, and they've scaled it up, and it's now operating across many venues in Australia. Linked into the mental health area, we've now got a program where we're rolling out mental health first aid training for our staff. Our ambition by the end of next year is that in every year-round operating venue, we will have, during every operating hour, at least one staff member trained in mental health first aid, able to respond and support a person experiencing psychological distress. At the moment, a big focus is on the training of staff around mental health and how to understand it and how to care for themselves and care for others. We completed just recently a campaign and had over 1,000 staff who completed mental health awareness training based on a UK developed program that became available during the COVID-19 crisis. So we actively promoted that, as well as supplementary materials, built another training program. That's been a resounding success, and the Belgravia Foundation agreed actually only last Friday that it will now use its resources to fund the development of a local version of the UK mental health awareness program. Our data from over 1,000 people indicates it had a compelling positive effect on them. Our data from the peer support for mental health program we developed likewise has really compelling positive evidence.
Yeah.
So we need a local version, and we've actually started building it now, and we aim to have that ready by early in the new year.
I think it's fantastic. And if you can embed that into just how you operate, and have that support there, because mental health obviously is on the rise. And I know you've probably been locked down in Victoria, and, it's challenging for people, not being able to get outside as much and connect with people. And so I really applaud Belgravia and the foundation for that work. I think it's fantastic. And in terms of, I suppose, ensuring that we can provide for the most in need in society. And obviously you've got some fantastic experience there, Jeff. How can we ensure that we support those that need it most?
Yeah, I think, David, you heard me say earlier that I'm a lifelong proponent of look, listen to learn. And I think when you do that, you have a better appreciation of the circumstances, the environment that you're in. So what we've done with our approach is we broadly call it community engagement. Others may call it co-design. In the past, it's gone under different names, etc. But it's speaking with people, learning from them about what are the preferences, priorities, and aspirations, needs that they have. Based on that information, we then work within each of the catchment areas, the local venues that we operate, to look to see how we can create a pathway to connect to what already exists. Alternatively, to modify something that already exists to ensure that at the end of the pathway, the door is open. And when something doesn't exist for a need expressed by the people in the catchment area, we then look to work with them to collaborate to create something which will address preferences, priorities, needs, aspirations. So we actually build the pathway and the doorway. And we've got good examples of that throughout Australia. I'm particularly proud of the work that was done at Auburn Ruth Everest around supporting young people who are have a characteristic of asylum seekers or refugees, and the creation of opportunities for them to be involved in economic participation. And that work led by you, David, when you were manager of that facility and of that area. We've now taken that and we have used that as the evidence. So we have a saying within Belgravia Leisure that data drives decisions. And I think it's a wonderful cliche because it empowers people to say, if you want to create and lead and innovate, then gather some evidence to confirm the use of resources will be wise. So out of the Ruth Everest program, we've taken that and we're now doing some things at the city of Liverpool in the west of Sydney. But we've also then embraced that. We're doing it in regional Victoria in Bendigo. We're doing that on the periphery of Melbourne in Melton. But we've now just entered into a federal government program called Job Access, where we're doing a top-to-tail review of our employment processes. So from the consideration of the characteristics of a new role or an existing role, all the way through to the end of a person's probation period, we are undertaking what we call the Workforce Diversification Project. And the concept is that our workforce should reflect the communities in which we operate. Yeah. And that's the way best to serve the community when we are part of it and they are part of us. So that all comes from that first project.
Yeah, I think having a workforce that reflects the demographic in which you work is really important, and each community is different, isn't it? You know, there's similarities there, but it's tailoring it to the needs, and that core design, I think you're right on the money, and asking people what they want is really important. In terms of Australia and chronic conditions, one in two's got a chronic condition. You know, we don't seem to be improving. You know, COVID hits as well, but this is a difficult question, Jeff. But if we could nudge one part of the system to improve the well-being of Australians, you know, what could that be?
Yeah, look, I did have a bit of a think about this, and I thought, yeah, good question. Thanks for that, David. I suppose the one thing, if I had, you know, if I was a benevolent dictator and I made a decision, it would probably be around the built environment, which is inclusive of the way we design, where we live, the way we design, how we move, transport and things like that. If you go back 100 years in Australia, many of the chronic diseases, which are now characterised as lifestyle diseases, effectively were far lower incidence. Just take obesity at the moment, you know, hovering overweight and obesity combined, hovering around 70% among the Australian adult population. If you go back into the early 1900s, the available data indicates that the incidence was minuscule. It was in less than a few percent. And what's happened is the abundance of energy, excessive foods and drinks for consumption, combined with a need for us not to move and inducements not to move. So if I had that small window of opportunity as a benevolent dictator, I would probably look towards the built environment. I am a bit of a realist, though, and it's unlikely that will happen. So I do think it then comes down to public health campaigns. And we, if it was a single entity, I'd be going with public health campaigns to do our best to provide every person with the opportunity to understand how they can contribute to their own health and happiness, and then to ensure that they have access to the knowledge they've been given the opportunity to learn. Self-care and care for others, because I do think the built environment, I'm looking out the window here, is here to stay. I do think while we may use different energy systems for the transport we use, we're still going to use that transport. Yeah. One thing I must say, David, I've been really pleased about in my local community is fewer cars on the road and more children on bicycles on the road. It's been really good to see. So maybe there's some good that will come out of this crisis.
Glass half full, as they say. No, some really good tangible examples there. I think I agree with all of them. And I don't think it's just one thing, is it? That's going to nudge the system. It's complicated. No. Thank you for that. And that leaves me onto the last question, and obviously it's come through loud and clear in terms of, you know, your passion for supporting those most in need and disability and diversity. But if we take you just personally, you know, and where you feel you fit in the system and how you want to contribute and influence it.
My role is quite specifically to lead and innovate to resolve seemingly intractable problems.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wedded to an evidence-based approach, and I think through research we can gather data which then will drive decisions and the allocation of scarce resources for good return on investment.
Mm-hmm.
Thrown in a few cliches from the business world, but I've learned that and embraced that while working with Belgravia Leisure. I'm also very actively looking to support other people so that I create a legacy effect and also a scalability effect so that others are given the opportunity to develop skills and approaches and characteristics which will allow them to, in turn, work in their areas or their sectors to use a similar approach to bring about change for good.
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially what I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah, I think you're a really good example of being the you know, the change you want to see. You know, it's I'm really honoured to have spent so much time with you at Belgravia, and I learned a lot from you. So I wanted to thank you for that. And you know, you continue to affect change and enable others to you know, to achieve, and also to you know, pursue, you know, their careers, and also you know, have impact, which I think is clear. So Jeff, that brings us to the end of our chat. Is there anything else that you want to add?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to speak and to be able to share with others the approach that I have found successful for improving inclusion of all.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'd say is that continuing learning is you know, is something that I think is important to you, isn't it? So, Jeff, fantastic. I hope to see you soon. It's been a long time since I've actually seen you in person, but yeah, I wish you all well for the rest of the year, and yeah, hope to catch you soon.
Thanks, David. Enjoy
Thanks,
your day.
Jeff. See you, mate. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.